My father and brother beat me for something I never did. Now that I'm successful, they want me back. I was 17 years old the last time my father hit me. He didn't slap me. He didn't grab my collar and yell in my face like he usually did when I disappointed him. He and my brother held me down on the garage floor and took turns until I stopped trying to explain myself, because every word out of my mouth just made them angrier. I remember the concrete was cold. I remember thinking, at some point between the second and third minute, that this might actually be the night I die in my own garage over something I didn't do. They didn't ask me a single question first. Not one. My brother's word was enough. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the town I grew up in. Cedar Falls, Ohio, is the kind of place where high school football isn't a sport. It's a religion, and my older brother Marcus was its favorite son. 2 years ahead of me, team captain, all-conference linebacker, the kid whose jersey number little boys wore to Friday night games. My father, Gerald, ran the hardware store his own father built, and Marcus's success was the closest thing Gerald had to a personal legacy. I was the other son. Quiet into computers, not much of an athlete, the kind of kid people described as the smart one in a tone that made it sound like a consolation prize. I want to be clear that I loved my brother. Growing up, before all of this, he used to let me tag along to his practices, and he'd absolutely destroy anyone who gave me a hard time at school. I thought for 17 years that if it ever came down to it, my brother would stand in front of a bus for me. He didn't. He drove the bus. It started at a party at the end of that September, at a teammate's house while his parents were out of town. I wasn't even planning to go, parties weren't really my scene, but Marcus asked me to come, which felt like a big deal at the time, like he was finally letting me into his world. I spent most of the night in the kitchen talking to a girl named Chloe Bennett, whose family had been close with ours since we were kids. Her dad and mine went fishing every June. She was 15, 2 years younger than me, and honestly, we mostly talked about a show we both watched. Nothing happened. I left around 11 because I had an AP Chem test the next morning, and I told at least 4 people I was leaving, including Marcus. I didn't find out what happened after I left until almost 2 years later. I'll get to that. What I found out 3 days after the party was that Chloe had gone to her parents in tears, saying someone at that party had cornered her upstairs and touched her without her permission. She was scared and confused, and when her mother gently asked who, my brother's name came up in the conversation before mine did, except it didn't stay there. Here's what I've had to sit with for years. My brother's best friend and fellow captain, a kid named Derek Marsh, was the one who followed Chloe upstairs that night. Derek was also the reason Marcus's college scholarship offer was still alive, because their position coach was recruiting them as a package deal to the same Division II program. If Derek got named in something like this 3 weeks before the state semifinal, the whole season, the whole recruiting pipeline, everything Marcus had built his entire identity around was over. So when Chloe, 16 years old, shaking, unsure, got pressed by adults asking, "Are you sure it wasn't the other brother, the quiet one, the one who was talking to you all night?" she said yes. Because she was 15 and terrified, and somebody in the room needed an answer, and my name was easier to give than her actual friends. And I didn't know this part for years, because Marcus had got to her at school 2 days earlier and told her, gently, like he was doing her a favor, that Derek had a rough home life and didn't mean anything by it, and that I was kind of a weird loner anyway and wouldn't have as much to lose. My father did not call me into the living room to ask my side. He and Marcus were waiting for me in the garage when I got home from school. My father's face when I opened that door is something I still see when I close my eyes some nights. He didn't look angry. He looked disgusted, which was so much worse. "Chloe told her parents what you did," he said. I said, "What are you talking about?" And Marcus hit me before I finished the sentence. I'm not going to describe every minute of what happened in that garage. What matters is this. It lasted long enough that I genuinely believed at 17 that my father might kill me. And that my brother, the person I had idolized my entire childhood, was helping him do it. When my mother tried to come out and stop them, my father told her to get back in the house, and she did. I don't blame her the way I used to. I understand now that she was as afraid of him as I was. I spent that night on my bedroom floor because I couldn't lie on my back. In the morning, my father told me I had until the end of the week to figure out somewhere else to live because he wasn't raising that in his house. My Aunt Diane, my mother's younger sister, came and got me 2 days later after my mother called her crying, unable to say the real reason, just that I needed somewhere to go. Diane took one look at the bruising on my ribs when I changed my shirt and did not ask a single follow-up question about what I'd supposedly done. She just said, "Get your things," and I lived with her for the rest of high school. Cedar Falls found out within a week, obviously. Small towns don't keep anything. I was the boy who assaulted the Bennett girl. Teachers who used to like me started grading my papers differently. A kid on the debate team told me to my face that he hoped I got what I deserved. Chloe's family stopped speaking to mine entirely, which I understand now was less about me specifically and more about her parents' own guilt at having pressured a scared teenage girl into naming someone before they had any actual proof. But at the time, from where I was standing, it just felt like the entire world had decided I was guilty and moved on without me. I never went back to that house. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not for my own graduation, which my parents did not attend anyway. Diane went instead and sat by herself in the family section and cried when they called my name, and I'll never be able to repay her for that. I want to skip ahead now, because I know you're waiting for the part where my life gets better, and it does, but I want you to sit for a second in how long it took. I didn't speak to my father for 11 years. I spoke to Marcus exactly twice in that time, both accidental run-ins at a gas station and a cousin's funeral, both under 2 minutes, both silent except for a nod. I put myself through community college working nights at a warehouse, then transferred and finished a degree in industrial engineering. I got into supply chain logistics almost by accident, took a job nobody wanted at a mid-sized distribution company, and turned out to be genuinely good at solving the kind of ugly, expensive bottleneck problems that make CFOs sweat. By 26, I was running regional ops for a company that moved freight for half the Midwest. By 29, with 2 former coworkers, I co-founded a logistics software company that automated the exact kind of scheduling nightmares I used to fix by hand. 4 years later, we sold a majority stake to a larger firm for enough money that Diane cried again, this time from the passenger seat of the car I bought her, which she still, to this day, insists was too much. None of that is meant to brag. I'm telling you because it matters to what happened next. Cedar Falls is small enough that word travels even when you've been gone for over a decade. My mother, who I'd reconnected with quietly a few years back, always outside my father's knowledge, always over coffee 2 towns over, mentioned once that people in town had started talking about me differently. The Walsh boy who did something terrible had become the Walsh boy who's some kind of tech millionaire now. Funny how fast a reputation flips once there's money attached to a name. My mother was the one who told me my father had been diagnosed with early-stage congestive heart failure. Nothing immediately fatal, but the kind of diagnosis that makes a man start doing math about how many years he has left and start feeling urgent about the things he's left undone. 3 weeks after that conversation, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus. "Dad wants to talk. It's been a long time. Can we meet?" No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an assumption that 11 years and a beating that left me afraid of garages for a decade would resolve itself, because he'd decided the timing was now convenient for him. I didn't respond for 4 days. When I finally did, I wrote one sentence. "What changed?" His answer told me everything I needed to know. "Dad's sick. We're getting older. Life's too short for this. You've done well for yourself. That's great. But family is family. Family is family." As if that phrase had meant anything to either of them the night they decided which son was worth sacrificing. I agreed to meet, but not on their terms. I told Marcus I'd come to Cedar Falls, but only to the diner on Route 9 in public at noon on a Saturday. Some part of me, I think, already knew I wasn't walking into that meeting to reconcile. I was walking in to finally get the one thing they'd never given me 11 years earlier, a chance to hear them explain themselves out loud, in front of witnesses, instead of in a garage with the door shut. What I didn't plan was Chloe. I hadn't spoken to her since that September. I found out later that my mother, in a moment of guilt she never fully explained to me, had reached out to Chloe's mother a few months earlier, just to see how she was doing. And the conversation had cracked something open that had apparently been sitting under the surface in that family for over a decade. Chloe was 27 now, married, living 2 towns over. And this is the part that changed everything. She had spent years in therapy working through exactly what happened that night. And who had actually done it, and how she'd been managed into naming the wrong person by 2 grown men who cared more about a football season than her. She reached out to me herself, 3 days before the diner meeting. Not an apology exactly, more like a confession she'd been carrying too long to hold by herself. She told me plainly that she'd always known, somewhere underneath the fear, that it hadn't been me. That Marcus had cornered her at her locker 2 days after the party and told her Derek's home life was rough and that I wouldn't have as much to lose. That she'd repeated that reasoning back to her own mother almost word for word, without understanding at the time that she was reciting a script my brother had handed her. She asked if she could come to the diner. I said yes before I'd fully thought it through. I sat in that booth on Saturday and watched my father walk in first, older than I remembered, moving slower. The kind of frail that sneaks up on a man who spent his whole life being the loudest person in every room. Marcus came in behind him, and for a second I saw the flicker of the same swagger he'd had at 18, like he still believed he could talk his way through anything if he stayed calm enough. They both sat down like this was any other family lunch. My father started with, "You look good." Successful, Marcus followed with something about how everyone makes mistakes when they're young and how we were all just scared kids. He actually used the word we, as if he had been a bystander, instead of the architect. I let them talk for exactly 4 minutes. I let my father get all the way to, the past is the past. What matters is family going forward, before I looked past him toward the door where Chloe was standing, having walked in exactly on cue. I have never in my life seen my father's face lose color that fast. Chloe didn't yell. She didn't need to. She walked over, stood at the end of the booth, and said, calm and clear, loud enough for the 2 tables next to us to hear every word, that it had never been me. That it had been Derek Marsh. That Marcus had coached her into naming me 2 days before she ever told a single adult, because Derek's scholarship mattered more to him than his own brother's life. She said she'd carried the guilt of that lie for 11 years, and she was done carrying it quietly. The diner had maybe 30 people in it on a Saturday afternoon. Cedar Falls is small enough that at least 6 of them recognized my father, and at least 4 recognized Marcus, who still gets stopped occasionally by people who remember him from Friday nights under the lights. 2 of them had their phones out within a minute. One woman, an old family friend of the Bennetts, stood up from her booth and said, loudly enough that the whole restaurant heard it, "You beat your own son over that?" My father tried to stand up and leave. I didn't stop him, I didn't need to. Chloe wasn't finished. She told the room, still calm, still clear, that my father and brother had beaten me in our garage for something they never once investigated, never once questioned, and that they'd let me carry that reputation through the rest of high school while the boy who actually did it went on to play college football 2 states over. She said she was only telling the truth now, because watching my mother's guilt eat at her for over a decade had finally made her realize how much damage silence does when it's protecting the wrong. People. Somebody in that diner filmed almost the entire thing. It was up online within a day, and because Cedar Falls is exactly the kind of small town where everyone still knows everyone, it didn't stay contained to a few hundred views. A local news outlet picked it up 2 days later after the video kept circulating, framed around wrongful accusation and the football program's old habit of protecting its stars. My father's hardware store, the one his own father built, started getting 1-star reviews within the week, most of them from people who'd never set foot in it. Just people who'd seen the video and wanted to say something. Marcus, who still lived in Cedar Falls and worked as an assistant coach at the same high school that once worshipped him, was placed on administrative leave less than 2 weeks later, while the district reviewed the allegations. And by the end of that month, he'd resigned rather than face a parents' meeting that had already been scheduled to discuss it. Derek Marsh, for what it's worth, is a name that resurfaced too. A local reporter tracked him down, now in his 30s, working in insurance 3 states away, and he didn't deny it when asked. He gave a short, uncomfortable non-answer about being young and not remembering the details clearly, which was its own kind of confirmation to anyone paying attention. I didn't go looking for any of that fallout. I want to be honest about that. I went to that diner to be heard, not to destroy anyone, and for a long time after I felt strange about how much attention it drew. But I also didn't feel guilty. 11 years of being the town's cautionary tale bought me exactly 0 grace when I actually needed it. And I wasn't going to manufacture grace for 2 men who'd never once asked me a single question before deciding I deserved to bleed on our garage floor. My mother called me a week after the video went viral, crying, not angry at me, just grieving out loud for the family she'd always hoped we'd eventually become again. I told her the truth, that I still loved her, that none of this was about punishing her, but that I wasn't going to pretend the last decade hadn't happened just because my father's heart was failing, and the timing had become inconvenient for him. 3 months later, my father's hardware store closed for good, not entirely because of the video. The man was 71, and the business had been struggling for years anyway. But the timing made it feel like more than coincidence to everyone in town. Marcus moved out of Cedar Falls entirely, taking a job coaching junior varsity somewhere 2 states away, somewhere nobody would recognize his name from the video. My mother still lives in the house, and we talk now, quietly, the same way we always did coffee 2 towns over, never mentioning my father unless she brings him up first. Chloe and I aren't close exactly, but we message occasionally. She told me once that saying it out loud in that diner was the first time in 11 years she'd slept through the night without dreaming about it. I still don't know if I'll ever speak to my father again. Deanne says I don't owe him the effort, and most days I agree with her. What I do know is that, for the first time since I was 17 years old, the story people in Cedar Falls tell about that garage isn't the one my father and brother told first. It's the true one. And it took 11 years, but it finally outlasted theirs.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.